Hey everybody, welcome back to Purrfect.dev. On today's show, we'll be talking about Scully.io with one of its co-creators, Aaron Frost.
How's it going, everyone?
Pop everybody back in here.
What's up,
there
Aaron?
we
Welcome
go.
to the show, man.
There we are. Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's really exciting news. You know, we've had static site generators floating around for a bit now, so I'm really excited to talk about Angular version of it finally.
I know. Me too.
It's cool.
I'm the same.
So we're going to dive in, first of all, just kind of introduce Aaron and what he's all about. On your LinkedIn, it says web architect, ng-conf organizer, which I think you're like the creator of ng-conf, right?
Yeah.
More than just an organizer. Google Dev expert, podcaster. I love the last one, Ice-fisherman-extraordinaire. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention Aaron has Hero Devs, CEO, co-founder, founder, all those awesome things.
Yeah.
So how about in your words? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and so our viewers can get to know you a little better.
So the only thing I would add to the list that you already said is I also have 5 kids. So my life, on top of everything we already said, my life, any sort of free time I may have had is gone. Right. So my kids are I got lucky though. Some people have like hard kids. I have 5 really easy kids. So that's nice.
So if we see a little gremlin like passing in the background there, we know what's going on.
No, yeah, you might. They love to crash the podcast. So they might definitely pop by to say hi.
Awesome.
And if not, you might
fun.
hear them screaming in the back. A couple of them that aren't in school yet, still running around. So. So yeah, I've been a web developer for a long time, and before that, I was in QA. I was like a senior QA automation engineer for quite a long time as well. A couple of my buddies and I, we were just at work one day, and we had this idea, and we're like, hey, let's maybe do an Angular event, and then we accidentally created, the largest Angular event on the planet, and so
it's a fun little accident.
Yeah, we worked really hard. Once we realized, oh man, we accidentally did this huge thing. We worked really hard to make sure it's awesome. And if you've never been, you should go, because you'll see. Yeah, this is a crazy, like, high value conference where you meet the people that are going to change your career at ng-conf. The people who will change your career, you meet them at ng-conf. So, and then
the good news is that we haven't been to ng-conf yet, but you've stamped our approval to do some podcasting while we're there this year. So
yeah, you guys
excited.
Definitely have a chance to do that. We'll make sure you have space. And if you want to work with us, we'll make sure you get in touch with the people you want to have on your podcast. So yeah,
that would be perfect. We'll touch base after.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then a GDE, I'm a Google developer expert. That was cool. Like 5 years ago, the Angular team was like, "Oi, come do this thing." And it's been, I didn't realize how much that title would change other people's perception of me. But it does. They think it matters. So I guess it does matter. But it's really cool. I'm the same guy I was before. But so being a GDE has been huge. Google sometimes pays for you to travel and go to conferences that you normally wouldn't have gotten to go to. Or like when I do go give a talk, Google will pay for my flight and hotel. So the conference doesn't have to pay for my flight and hotel. So like,
that's awesome.
It's a way to constantly give back to the community. And I love it. So the GDE, I've been a podcaster for quite a while. We just, ng-conf just stopped what we were doing for podcasts. And we just started our new podcast. It's called The Angular Show. We got like 6 episodes queued up. It will be out soon. And then I'm an ice fisherman. That's like my favorite hobby is ice fishing. So
you're actually based in Utah, correct?
Yeah, just south of Salt Lake City.
Do you get a lot of ice fishing time these days?
So yeah, I went on Sunday, and I went the Sunday before that, and then in December I went 3 times, and I had, out of the 3 trips, I had 2 car accidents. So that was that was sucky.
No,
that is not.
Yeah,
good.
It was bad. Yeah, not good.
Awesome. So what kind of got you into the Angular side of the house? I assume that drove everything else. Was it just client work that you were doing on the side, and then you started your own company kind of around that?
So I used to work at a large organization here in Salt Lake. It's called ICS, and there was like, I don't know, several hundred developers, and there was one team that was like the stack team, and they decided what stack the teams would use. And I was part of the JavaScript stack team, and we were on Backbone, and it was time to do the next thing and do Knockout or AngularJS or, you know, Ember, because that was really your 3 options, you know, or keep going with Backbone. And Angular, I mean, hands down won that battle, right? AngularJS was the best option to go there. So we kind of took the whole organization that direction. And then I went to another company, and we also moved them to AngularJS. And then and that's just kind of been, and then ng-conf helps keep me kind of in as well. But now most of my client work is all around Angular, and most of like why I get brought in to do architecting stuff is all around like ng upgrade scenarios or more advanced Angular topics that people need help either training on or just implementing inside their app. So
that's really cool. Yeah. Did you find like jumping from like AngularJS into what we know as Angular now, was that difficult? Do you still have a lot of clients or people that you deal with that are still on JS? Or
yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of people on AngularJS. It was the only option for like 3 or 4 years. So there's still a lot of people on it. You know, for the last 3 or 4 years, React has been, you know, just gangbusters. And then for the last 2, Angular's been gangbusters as well. But if you go back to projects that were created pre 5 years ago, most of them are going to be on AngularJS. And so, I still get a lot of calls on that stuff. And a lot of it is around upgrading and some of the pitfalls that people will get to there. So,
cool.
Because a lot of people, they want to start using Angular, but they don't want to shut down and like throw away their old code and, you know, rewrite. So doing ng upgrade is the way you do that. It's the most cost efficient way forward. So
yeah. So on ng-conf, you probably start. They keep kind of delaying 9, but that'll probably be the big release of Ivy, right? Any thoughts on kind of what a game changer that'll be?
Yeah. So I've done quite a few talks about where I think Ivy will take us. I think Ivy opens up the ingenuity around Angular to the community. And so I think that the community will begin to provide some additional solutions, and it won't all depend on the Angular team as much. An example is like Dominic Elm. He created template streams is what he calls them. And it's a way to, like, you can register a click event just by doing $click equals clicks. And then on your component, you now have a click observable, you know what I'm saying? That will get you all your clicks. And so like, and that's an easy way to kind of funnel click events into an observable that before manually to wire that up, it would take several lines of code, but now you just kind of will get that out of the box. And so I think it's going to open up some of the ingenuity to the community. And so it's really kind of anyone's guess as to where that's going to go. All I know is it should make Angular significantly more reactive, which is got me excited. So
yeah, I'm super excited to hear a bunch of the talks. Hopefully that come at ng-conf around that same subject. So I'm eager to get to that moment for sure. So yeah, I mean, without further ado, let's talk about Scully. I mean, this is the hot item on our list. It's the first static site generator that I know of
for Angular.
That is built on Angular. It's kind of awesome. We just demoed a little tutorial at Jamstack last night. You're awesome, throwing some comments, updates. I really appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah.
So tell me what drove you to make this move down Scully and static site generation in Angular.
So I mean, kind of, it looks like we lost Nick.
That's okay. Nick does most of our editing.
So Scully came from when we created ng-conf, we didn't know that we were at the perfect time to build this thing, right? And we were. And since then I've been like, man, what are some other things that are just like the perfect time for a thing? And like 4 months ago, I was like, man, I've heard people asking for a static site generator in Angular for over 2 years. So this thing should already exist. It's surprising it doesn't, especially considering where Gatsby is. And so I was like, I just kind of reached out to the Angular team and was like, hey, what's the status? You know, where are we at? Like, do you need help, or should I help someone, or do you need someone to build it from scratch? And tell me. And Steven was like, yeah, we need someone to build it from scratch because no one's really working on it, but we have some ideas of what it should be like and blah, blah, blah. He had well thought out what he thought it should be, which was awesome. So we sat down. He brain dumped onto us, which was fantastic to have the synchronous, like the synergy between them and us to be able to use their ideas in this project. And so and we kind of came back with maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit more Gatsby-ish, and we came to a place where like, yeah, this is how it should be. And so he was like, cool, well, I'm going to give you this. And so they're like, we're going to help you start. So they helped us out. And then we built it, and it didn't take too long to get something that worked, but it was extremely buggy. And we're still working out some of the kinks. Like sometimes people will run our commands and they'll get an error that doesn't make sense. And so we're trying to be like, hey, make that error friendly. Like stop swallowing the actual error. Or stop giving me the actual error and give me like a friendly error. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the initial days of Angular. Like,
yeah,
it would blow up, and you're like, it's a module somewhere. I don't know what's going on, and now it's just light years ahead. So you'll get there, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're going. And honestly, last night as I watched your guys' podcast, I was like, or not your podcast, your meetup. I was like, yeah, we should add. So I added a couple issues around kind of what you guys were experiencing last night. So
yeah, it was pretty cool. So for people that haven't kind of checked it out yet, I'm gonna go off the cuff here a little bit, but basically it takes any of the router routes that are set up in Angular, and it starts just going through those and basically creating static HTML, JavaScript pieces of that, it's a shift from Gatsby, right? Gatsby kind of says, hey, give me all your pages and we'll kind of keep building it, and you'll write Node.js and we'll create some more. But you're kind of attacking it more from the sense that we already have an Angular project out there, and we want to kind of make it more static. Can you talk through like what that mindset is and that shift a little bit?
Yeah, so I want you to imagine like all the React apps that were created before Gatsby existed, right? They're not really candidates for Gatsby because Gatsby's written a very specific way. I think we can agree. And so to kind of shoehorn an existing React app into a Gatsby app, it takes not an insignificant amount of heavy lifting. Like it takes work, and you need to be like dedicated to it. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. And a lot of projects are just kind of they're not inside the net for Gatsby. Angular had something kind of like that already, and it's called Angular Universal. And you could write an Angular app in a way that it could run in a universal scenario. And what that means is it's generated on the server, and you could get some of the same benefits of Gatsby by using a universal, but it had the same limitations where like you had to write a very specific version of Angular, and you couldn't just use any third-party library you wanted, because if that third-party library wasn't safe to run in a universal context, then your app was broken. Like your build would fail, and you couldn't kind of go forward with this Angular universal app. You'd have to get rid of that dependency. Similarly, if you want to take an existing project that's in Angular and you want to put it into universal, that's a heavy lift. It's very difficult. It's not easy for anyone who's done a universal app from scratch. It takes a lot of effort just to keep it in line with universal. To take an app that's not in line and get it in line, it's a massive focus. And so we realized that Puppeteer's crazy fast compared to some of the solutions that existed in the past. And if we used Puppeteer instead of rendering it inside of Node, which is what Gatsby I mean all of the I feel bad for targeting Gatsby. It's really everything. Right. It's not just them. Like everybody besides Scully, basically, right, uses this Node context. And so we knew, hey, if we go ahead and run this in Puppeteer, then at that point it's just running in the browser. Any Angular app could do it. In fact, we could add React support, and then any React app could do it too. And so we knew that going the Puppeteer route would allow for the most flexibility and the easiest to integrate with overall. So in a few months, once we've completely nailed down the Angular story, we'll add React support, and then React projects can start using it as well and getting the exact same benefits, using the exact same plugin system, right? And getting the same kind of benefits out of the project that Gatsby gets, but without having to rewrite into a Gatsby version of React, right? Sure. And Vue and other projects. So our goal is for that. So right now we're trying to get that first like power story. So we have a big client, a huge client that makes tons of money. Like their conversion rate is astronomical. And they're like, we want to pre-render our stuff because we know we could make more if our mobile story was nailed down. Sure. So we're working on implementing Scully with this client. Now here's the thing. It's an AngularJS hybrid app. So it's not just an Angular app. So we're already proving out our story that this works with non-Angular apps too. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
And so we've already added functionality to provide affordances for non-Angular apps. And so technically at this point, you could probably already run a React app through it. It would take some TLC, but you could probably get it to do it. In fact, I should do a demo. I should just do a sample, a POC. but largely it's awesome already where it's at. And so we're really, really excited given where we're starting from. So yeah. Does that make sense?
How does it? Yeah, kind of. But how does that work? Do you still have to use the Angular router, or are you mainly like writing all the configuration for Scully at that point and somehow like balancing the React router with it?
So the cool part is we don't integrate too much with we don't integrate too much with Angular. Like we largely just provide a few hooks in Angular, like, hey, this thing, and this thing. But we needed to provide affordances for AngularJS as well, right? So we've already written some, I'll call them affordances, but they're really hooks to allow non-Angular things to say, Scully, also do this route. Also do, like, you see all the Angular routes, but there's also all these other routes that you don't see. So
that's interesting. So like if I fired up a great React app, right, and through, like, not even with routing maybe, and you just started carving out kind of, here's what we want the static version of this to actually look like, and then you just kind of start that configuration side to it. You're basically just popping out React pages at the end of it.
You could add a create React app with routing, and it would just work. You don't need the Gatsby pieces. You could just do create React app and it will just work. And that's what's so cool about it is we're already adding these affordances to do that stuff. I should POC it just to kind of get everyone to say, oh yeah, he's right. It does work.
Yeah, I think that'd be a huge like revelation, like for people to realize what's really going on there at that point. Where was my head going with that? So honestly, with the Scully setup in that way, do you see like the evolution to like where Gatsby started providing plugins and things like that to build out like more pages to like contentful you could pull in? I know you guys have a markdown kind of example out there to build from. Is that the like grand vision to start to catch up to like all those providers and plugins and things like that?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you our vision. Our vision was different than like, I'm going to keep calling out Gatsby just because everyone knows it. And I'm not trying to pick on them. Ours was just as big as them. And we're way younger, but it's, the vision is actually bigger, if I'm being honest. And we, as you learn Gatsby, one of the things is like, hey, you can't do anything without learning GraphQL. So a lot of people are like, oh God, I don't know it. I don't have time to know it. Maybe I'm too junior to even grasp the concept. It's like, I don't know, And we were like, well, what if our interface is not GraphQL? What if our interface is a promise? So what if we make our interface be just the standard promise that everyone already knows, right? If you made it through a web dev school and didn't learn promises, then you went to the wrong web dev school, right? And so we wanted to allow you to just write a plugin, but was as simple as providing as giving me back a promise. And so that's kind of what the plugin API is all based on. It's all based on promises. So if you have like what's the npm contentful, npm JS contentful? I bet Contentful has one. Already has an SDK
for Gatsby, or
just
for
Contentful. Yeah, so Contentful,
they do.
Contentful has its own SDK on npm, right? 172,000 downloads a week. So you can just write it. You can just write a plugin that says, "Hey, I use that node package, and I get the data and I return it in a promise, and I'm done." Like, so plugins are super simple to use. You just use the already existing node architecture, and hopefully there's already a JavaScript SDK, some node SDK that already exists, like for in Contentful's sake, or WordPress has them, Adobe AEM has them. Like all the big ones already have node SDKs. So you need to get data content out of a CMS.
Mm-hmm.
There's already a an SDK that does it.
Yeah, it's super interesting to me at that point, because now you're finally starting to become, I'll say, part of the Jamstack story with Scully. That it was a piece that was definitely missing, in my opinion. Like I grew up Angular, right? But I had to write all of HMP over to a Gatsby site because that's what I wanted. I wanted a statically built site. I didn't want a spa that loaded up. I wanted good SEO, like all those parts and pieces. Not saying you couldn't do it with Angular. Like there's ways.
It was hard,
It's hard.
It was like, compared to Gatsby, it was impossible. Gatsby was just so much easier. It makes sense why you would have done that. That's a good decision. So yeah, I totally get it.
So kind of on the same,
but that's where Scully came from. So many friends of mine were like, dude, I really need performance. Performance is now number one. I got to have it. SEO, performance. Right. Like, I don't want to have a heavy cost for production. So I need the low cost on production, high security. I'm going to Gatsby.
Yeah.
And it's like all these Angular developers who are like, I'm going to Gatsby. Like, cool. That's even more baffling that this doesn't exist for Angular.
Yeah.
That's where Scully came from.
The crazy part for me is I didn't even know React until it's like, well, I'm going to move to Gatsby. And then all of a sudden, like, all right, I'll learn React on top of it. So it's kind of fun to see that. I guess to dive back into some of the performance things, you actually commented on, like, to create 100 pages or whatever the quote was. I think it was 1,000 pages. You were kind of quoting like under a minute. Currently, it supports Angular 9, not 8, correct?
We added 8 support. So there's 8 and 9.
So both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And technically the 8, you should be able to install the version 8 inside your 7 as well. So if you had an Angular 7 project, you probably could still get Scully to work just by using the 8 dependencies. Sure. But the 9 ones they're distinct. So you do you
see a speed improvement there?
No, I mean,
not really. It's so marginal.
The speed improvement would be, does Angular render faster in 9? If it does, then that's the improvement that we would have. But it's not our tool is getting faster. And last I saw, Ivy has like all these goals to be faster. I don't know how much faster it actually is, like this initial release. I know it's kind of wondering the same. I know it's some smaller, but it's not everything we've been waiting for 2 years. It's the fastest, smallest thing ever. It's not that. But it allows them to now go towards that, which they were completely blocked. So Ivy just getting it out allows it also, on top of unhandcuffing the Angular community, and unhandcuffs the Angular team as well. So any speed improvement in Scully from 9, it's transitive. It's the actually it's just because Angular is faster. So I would bet it's probably negligible.
So a couple of the items on the question list here. I don't know what they fully makes sense, but I'm going to ask him anyways. So I think we covered lazy loaded routes and Jamstack. It looks like that works perfectly. It makes sense because it's just built into the router basically. What do you start to do with like things like Auth Guards and things where my Firebase backend is preventing you to access a page? Does that still get built? How does that work within that whole piece?
So I'm with Auth Guards, you mean? Like, so I have a view that doesn't, you have to be logged in to see it.
All right.
Does your guard redirect?
No.
What does your guard do?
Let's say it does redirect. Let's make it fun.
Okay. So if you did, let's say you have an Auth Guard that's like /admin, and you have an Auth Guard that's like, if you're not auth and you're not an admin, go back to the homepage or whatever, right?
Yep.
If you and then Scully tries to render that. So there's this new concept that you have to kind of think about when you're doing a Gatsby or a Scully app, which is there's dev time, then there's generate time, and then there's the time that it runs on your client's computer. So you have this new time that you have to think about. And so generation time, like Scully build time, it's going to run inside of a Puppeteer browser. And so it's exactly what you think is going to happen is going to happen. It's going to say, hey, go to this page. The Auth Guard is going to say false, redirect back to home. And then for that view, it's going to actually render the home page. That makes sense. So it's going to be kind of wonky. So you do have to consider that in your views because the Puppeteer it's not authenticated, right? Like when you think about it, it's not an authenticated view. It's unauthed. So cool. I suppose there's a way we could provide you to auth for those guards, but for now, that's not a thing. So
like provide a CLI string or something like that actually auths it in,
or just some plugin configuration. Something like that.
That's cool. So one of the weirdest things, just getting used to Gatsby, like learning React, you start to dive into Gatsby, like it's always considered not running in the browser, right? So like if you have anything related to a window, and I know this is very unangular, but I'm going to ask it anyways, like if you're referencing window, your build will blow up in Gatsby. Is that kind of something you see in Scully as well?
No. I mean, you can reference
because you're Puppeteer, right?
Because it's Puppeteer. The window does exist. I mean, in Gatsby, you can make an affordance. You can say, hey, in my Gatsby config, if you see the window, ignore it or just don't barf. Like you can save yourself from death, right? So it's not like you can't talk to the window in Gatsby. You just have to add extra affordances to allow you to do that. And in Angular Universal, you don't even have that affordance. Like if you're talking to the window in Angular Universal, you're dead. Like your app dies. And the problem with it isn't that you're gonna do it. The problem is that also your third-party libs that you depend on, they might be doing it. And so that's where you really die.
That's the worst part.
It's like, I don't even know what all my tool chain is doing. I know what I'm doing, and maybe I enforced it on my team, but what does the tool chain we're using do? Like, what does my third-party libs do? And so you have to support everyone being universal safe, which just sucks I think that sucks for Gatsby. I think that sucks for Universal. I think it just sucks. Right. And Scully just does not have that limitation, which is what makes it so you can add it. Yeah, it makes it so you can add it into an existing Angular project or into an existing, Framework X project. So yeah,
that's really cool. So one of the, and maybe you're learning this with the bigger provider that you're working with there, or the client, I should say. So I have like a Sanity backend that is consumed through GraphQL, and then that presents to a page and it builds out type of thing. When you have that kind of setup and you're used to non-developer type people producing content, right? So they're not in Markdown, they're in some fancy like Contentful, Sanity, whatever backend. The biggest complaint I always get is kind of that live render capability to see what they're posting, along with what we have to build this. Now there's thousands of pages in. How do you see that kind of vision in the DevOps world, if it is DevOps, kind of fitting in Angular? Like, are you rebuilding constantly? What's that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building, whether you're doing this with Universal or Scully, if you're statically generating your website, so I'm going to tangent real quick and then come back to answer your question again.
No more.
So in Angular 9, the Angular Universal team added a new feature called pre-render. So you can get a lot of pre-rendering functionality with Universal now. So a lot of what, hey, Scully's awesome, it gives you this. You can get some of that now with Universal, right? And a lot of people were pre-rendering their website with Universal and then deploying the setting, but they had to manually write those scripts, right? Anyway, so that pre-rendering thing has kind of existed for a while, but you have to custom it. It's existing more by default in Angular 9 through Universal. So I just wanted to explain that also exists with Universal as well. So because I'm trying to be impartial and educate everyone as to all their options, right? Not just say, hey, use Scully no matter what.
Yeah.
Now remind me what your question was again.
Yeah, basically the big question is always when you're a non-technical team on the back end.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You actually mentioned AEM, right? AEM is a great example. So you have content editors that are creating your blog posts, right? They're used to like a WordPress or AEM where like, here's what you're doing, you see it, and then you just publish and it's there, right? There's no build time or anything like that. What do you see in kind of that DevOps workflow for Scully in the future? Is that like, how's that fixed?
I think that when Scully is big enough and ready to like go to the next level, and it's like, hey, we need to pivot into a for-profit company, I think our SaaS offering will be providing a layer of hooks that allow you to redeploy your Angular app. So because there's a really simple rebuild of Scully when the Angular didn't change and I just need to re-render your website. That's a really simple build.
That's interesting. I haven't read on that one. So you could actually do one new blog post and it just creates that page?
Ideally, that's where we're going to be. As long as the Angular code hasn't changed, then and I just need to re-render content, then yes.
Okay.
But you have to. So there's two types of builds. Is all I'm trying to say. The Angular code changed, or just the content changed.
Right.
And the first deploy kind of has to be done in house, right? I have to have access to your GitHub repo, where I can do an ng build and whatever, all your tests and blah and blah to make sure everything's copacetic. And then the second half is the Scully part of that. Well, if marketing changes some content inside AEM or WordPress or whatever, right? You said yours is Sanity through GraphQL. Where if you change content in those, then you can only do the second half. You can just do the Scully build because the Angular is the exact same. So I can still take the same bundle we had from your last build and just do a content deploy. And so I think companies are going to be able to, they're going to have two types of, like the company I'm working with, we've definitely already restructured their CI/CD to say, hey, luckily for them, their content doesn't change too often. But there are companies where their content's going to be changing multiple times a day, right? And they're going to have hooks that says, hey, if this happens, rebuild. If this happens, rebuild, but only do the second half of the build. But if this happens, do the full build, right? Where you redeploy all the Angular and then regenerate every single route with Scully. Now, here's the thing. If you only change content, I can allow you to just generate a couple new pages because all of your bundles names are the same. Right. Like your Angular file names didn't change. The hashes on your file names are the same as the last time. But if the Angular code has changed, you have to regenerate the whole website. Otherwise, some of the URLs will be pointing to one Angular hash file name, and others will be pointing to an Angular hash file name that doesn't exist anymore. So anytime Angular gets redeployed, you have to rebuild everything. But the good news is it's very fast. Like thousands of pages are only going to take you 1 or 2 minutes, like tops. Like it's not like this big, oh my gosh thing, right? I mean, if your build box is like 2 core, 2 gigs of RAM, then I'm going to have to eat crow on my commitment to the time there. It's going to take longer.
There's some technical aspects behind that, right?
Yeah. So,
so I mean, that's even as small as my stuff is. It's one of my pain points. Like if I don't change any code right now, I have to rebuild the whole thing. And it's kind of because there's twofold in there, right? Like I have a blog list or a lessons list or a course list, but then within those, I need the blog pages built as well. And so I don't know of a way, maybe there is a way on Gatsby to say, hey, I didn't touch the code. Like, don't mess with that, but just recreate the blog list page and recreate the blog page and update Algolia and things like that. But it would be nice to get into a world that like, hey, I just added a page. Please release this thing, create it statically, done, right?
Yeah.
Like that limits the build time huge.
Yeah, that was why we had the opportunity to say, hey, let's make an Angular builder for the Angular CLI. And then the whole Scully will happen through this builder. And the problem with that is it forces you to do the whole build every time. The Angular build and the other build. And sometimes the Angular build with tests, how long can Angular builds take? Like I've seen Angular builds take significant amount of time, right? With tests and everything. Like they take time. Yeah. But I don't know of anything in Gatsby that would allow you to bypass the React rebuild. But with Scully, that was why we architected it separately. We're like, hey, if you only need to do the second piece, then you can just do the second piece. And so that's largely where we're at.
Very cool.
And what we want to do is we want to be able to say, hey, cache the routes, cache the routes that you find, so that when you do a Scully build, that first 15 or 20 seconds where it's discovering the routes, well, you can skip that. So we want to be able to say cache the routes. And then if you know there's no new routes, so this is only a content change build, then just use the same cache routes as last time. Because if you can do that, man, then we can start to and so you use cache routes and only build pattern like routes that match these patterns. So anything with blog, like then all of a sudden things get crazy, right?
Yeah, that's a game changer for sure.
Yeah, so that's where we're at, where people can deploy stuff without having to recompile all their JavaScript. So that's the goal, though. That's why I think once we get solid on Angular and then we add React support and we're solid on that as well, this is going to be stupid. People are going to flock to this thing like crazy. It's going to be big.
Yeah, that's really fun. Yeah. Well, that's probably all the technical questions I have on Scully. Is there anything else you want to mention about it?
You asked about where the name came from in this doc that you have here.
Yeah, that was going to be my next fun question. So,
so I'm big into trying to make the world look like what it should look like. And by that, I mean, I'm into equality and I'm into diversity and inclusivity, making people feel welcome. And so I was like, hey, let's get this thing to be named a superhero name because it's built by hero devs. But let's get a hero that I want it to be a powerful female protagonist that everyone can love. And so we kind of started looking at names, and a friend, Sharon Diorio, she recommended Scully. And she said Dana Scully. Like that was one of the things I was like XFiles, static files, XFiles, static files, static site generator. Like this fits. And
that's really cool.
Dana Scully was an absolute badass, right?
Yep.
And so it just kind of made perfect sense at that point. Up to that point, we had been calling it Project Coulson behind the scenes because we needed to hear him. Yeah, like Phil Coulson.
That's
exactly.
Awesome.
So it was up to that. It was Project Coulson, but then once we found Scully, everyone was like, definitely Scully. So
that's really cool. That's a good backstory.
Yeah. So that's where it came from.
It kind of fits into my random question. Then, do aliens exist? Are they out there?
How could they not be? Statistically speaking.
Yeah, I'm same boat.
If you look at the theory of pansporia, they have to exist. There's no way that they don't exist.
Very cool. So I don't know if you happen to see or not. We also do like a perfect pick at the end of the show. If you don't have yours ready, I can give you a minute. You think about it.
I'll go second.
I hope my screen share doesn't die. I've been having a problem with my Mac and screen sharing, but I'm gonna throw up. Of course, my pick. I'm gonna steal it from you before you get to it. Let's see here. ng-conf. Go check it out. I'm looking forward to traveling out there in April, meeting all the people. To your point earlier, Aaron, it's a game changer. I think I always preach people when you go to conferences, please network. I mean, that is the number one thing. Maybe number two, but really close to number one thing. the content is of course probably number one. So that's my first pick. My second pick, I can't wait for the day that it shows up on Site Builder. There's going to be a Scully out on StackBit that just can create a site like magic. So those are my two picks for my day. Nothing too random. No Netflix shows today. How about you, Aaron?
All right. Let me share my screen. So my pick is going to be, I found this podcast recently. It's called The Last Podcast on the Left. And I largely do podcasts around work stuff, right?
Yeah.
But these podcasts have nothing really to do with programming at all. And it's three of the most entertaining podcasters I've ever heard, ever. And like they're just so good at what they do. And like, so I'm from Utah, and they did 6 episodes on Mormonism. And being from Utah, they were absolutely fascinating. Like, just because these dudes who they've never been like as surrounded by Mormonism as I have been, their analysis of it was one of the funniest 14 hours I've ever sat. So I was laughing basically uncontrolled. Like I was either learning or just crying from laughter. They're so funny. So I'm just going to pick The Last Podcast on the Left if you need something entertaining that's not programming related.
Very cool.
So yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. If we don't talk prior to the conference, I'm looking forward to coming out, meeting you, shaking your hand. Maybe we can do a podcast while we're out there.
Yeah, hopefully.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Remember, everybody else, check us out on Purrfect.dev.
Thanks again for watching Purrfect.dev. We also host a podcast on Purrfect.dev. This feeds out to iTunes, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Overcast.fm, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Stitcher. We hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching Purrfect.dev.